Are GPU prices really going down? I mean, it's been like months now until we've had some big GPU news. It seems like we're kind of in really stagnant waters. But at the same token, people just haven't been buying GPUs. The prices went up way too much, demand went down, and we have new GPUs on the lower end, like this guy here, AMD 7600. And of course, maybe another competition here. This is going to be the Nvidia 4060. So these are two GPUs under $300, and that's considerably more affordable than like a 4090, for example, which is $1,600 plus, and even the 4080, 7900 XTX. Those have all been pretty expensive, and I've actually been surprised with both of these GPUs. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. For example, I was playing Ratchet and Clank, a new game. It's a PlayStation port. While it really struggled on the 7600 specifically, I don't think that game does well with AMD GPUs. When I played it on the 4060, if you kind of like mess with the settings a little bit, like on the 7600, I had to put it maybe like on medium with like FSR 2.1 on like balanced. It really struggled at 1440p. I'm not playing this at 1080p, which I know these GPUs are more geared towards that. But the 4060 definitely performed a lot better. Not to mention that it has DLSS 3. I know fake frames, it's not very popular, but it does allow you to squeeze a little bit more performance and a little bit more graphics out of a GPU like this. So if I was playing Ratchet and Clank, which I know it's not going to be a game everybody plays, but that game specifically, I wouldn't buy this GPU, even though this is a little bit cheaper, and it looks pretty cool, by the way, this, the reference edition. I would have gotten the 4060. I paid $289 for this on Amazon. So that's not too bad. Like, I can get a pretty good experience. On the same 1440p monitor, I've had, 4080 and 4090. And yes, those get you crazy high numbers. You're going to be over, 100 FPS, 200 FPS in certain cases, even with ray tracing on. But the 4060 was able to sort of get away with it looking pretty good and pretty smooth. So it's not the worst thing, some of these GPUs under $300. Now, let me be clear, the 7600 is also very competitive. Like in other games, it's going to perform much better. I think it's specifically Ratchet and Clank that just favors Nvidia. And this I've seen across other reviews as well. So if we take a look at some of the GPU prices now, this is 2023. We're now in August. We're getting close to the end of the year. Let's see what's going on. Let me use Micro Center as a reference because that's the place that you find the most GPUs locally. They usually have pretty good prices. And when people can't find a GPU, back during the pandemic and everything that happened, they would complain that not everybody has a Micro Center near them. So let's see what the prices are at Micro Center, which would be a good indication of some of the best pricing that you can get. They're not going to like scalp you like some Amazon or Newegg third-party sellers, for example. So if we take a look here, starting at the very top, there are still really expensive 4090s. Look at this Asus 4090 with the, with the AIO, with the liquid cooler, $2199. Like, I'm not sure how many of these they're going to sell because, I'd rather get a Founders Edition or even a Strix for that matter, instead of paying $21.99. So we can see here the prices are still really obscene. There's even a white Strix for $2,099. That's way too expensive. I'd rather just get a Founders Edition and save $500, especially this late into the game now, my opinion. As we kind of check, so the 4090s definitely still really expensive. Like, it's really hard to find anything that's really under MSRP. The cheapest one we're going to find is maybe $1629, which is that PNY. So the high end doesn't seem to have gone down that much. Now, if we go into the 4080, there are a lot more sales on the 4080. The 4080s are expensive to begin with. Look at this 4080 Tough, $1399. It's on sale for $1299, which is still really expensive. And then as we go down towards MSRP, like $1199, you do see a decent amount. And then you do see some 4080s under MSRP, $1149, Maybe the lowest that we see here is 1,099, which is once again that PNY. So the 4080, not really discounted much. The 4090, still really expensive. And then, of course, we have some AMD 7900 XTX GPUs at 1,029. You have some around, maybe the cheapest one is like 949, something like that. So you can see the top end hasn't moved really that much. Unless you get an open box or something like that, they're still very, very expensive. The same thing. I mean, look at these 4070 Ti's. I mean, you have some $900 4070 Ti's. That's like really high. I mean, look at this one, a gigabyte 4070 Ti for $929. $949 for an MSI 4070 Ti. Come on. That's like ridiculous. That GPU should be at this point like $699, honestly. So that's like almost $300 overpriced. That's why nobody's buying these GPUs. And this is Micro Center, who have some pretty good pricing. Like, that's pretty ridiculous. I mean, even the 7900 XT 879, that should be $699, honestly, if it's going to sell. That's why these GPUs aren't selling. I can understand, like, Micro Center would have bought these from whatever third-party distributor, probably for a high price, because there aren't really, too many big margins in GPU sales, so they can't really go too low. That's why they do all these bundles with processors and with different builds, so that way, even if they lose a little on the GPU, people have an incentive to buy more, but that's not a good situation here. These GPUs are very, very expensive. I mean, as we start to get to the $699 and under, the only thing we start to really see here are like 4070s. I mean, 4070 is not like a bad GPU, but for almost $700, that is not a good GPU at all. It's only good if you're getting it for $600 or less, in my opinion. So like for $599, you do start to find some like Gigabyte and Zotac 4070s. And of course, with some open box, you can get up, down. I see the lowest one here, maybe like $539. And then you start to get into a really murky area around $500. Around that $500 price point, I mean, a 4060 Ti, 16 gigabytes, that's just way too expensive for that price point. So like $399, maybe, but $399 for a 4060 8 gigabyte is what you're more likely to find. So that's why we really need AMD to release some of those 7800s, maybe a 7700. That way it starts to push that pricing down. I mean, at $649, if we did get that 7900 GRE, that's not too bad, but we've seen that GPU is really like a 6950 XT, so it's not like you're getting too much better performance for that price. So overall, I'm going to say GPU prices, at least for Micro Center, still seem actually like really high, all the way to the high end and lower. The only ones that actually seem semi-reasonable are the things like a 4060 and maybe the 7600 for like a more entry-level system. But you have to keep in mind, these GPUs don't really have that big of advantage over last generation. So even though they're not bad for the current pricing compared to everything else, you compare this 4060 to like a 3070, even a 3080 from last generation, as the used prices get down lower, it starts to become a much murkier proposition. Not that 3080s are anywhere near $300 at this point, but you're not really getting that big of a performance jump. I mean, there are cases where the 4060 barely beats a 3060 from last generation, and even though these GPUs are getting cheaper, at least the 4060 and the 7600, it's really the only area where they're being more competitive. Anything over $400, it seems like you're overpaying a considerable amount compared to previous generations. Maybe Nvidia and AMD just don't care at this point. Maybe they've realized that the market is stagnant anyway, and they're going to keep their prices high because that seems to keep shareholders maybe happier than GPU sales, because they're selling so many GPUs in terms of like AI and things like that. So I'm sure they're focusing all of their efforts on those much more profitable GPUs, and these can just kind of sit on the shelf. It's going to be, they're in inventory, but it's not going to be a financially really terrible position for them because they have other things to counterbalance this with. So I guess bad news for now, even though some GPUs are on sale, like a 4080, it's way too expensive, and that's because people just aren't buying them. But it seems like most other GPUs, especially when we're looking at Micro Center here, just way too expensive. So unless you get something like a 4060 or a 7600 and just save a lot of money, it might not be a bad idea to look on the used market and see if you can get some much better deals from somebody upgrading or something like that, instead of just spending almost $1,000 on a 4070 Ti. 4070 Ti is not a terrible GPU as a product, even though the memory bus, like we've said a million times, is a little bit flaky. But for $1,000, no thank you. It should be like $600 to $700 realistically, compared to the performance that it has and compared to last generation. All right, guys, let me know what you think. Are the GPU prices around where you're seeing like kind of stagnant as well? Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.